2 weeks after we buried my father, my sister Michelle slid a will across his kitchen table and told me all I had to do was sign. She said it soft, the way he talked to a kid. Just a formality, Sean. Dad wanted it simple. I looked down at the page, at my father's name, signed clean and easy at the bottom, and something in my chest went cold and went quiet. Because my father hadn't signed his name that smooth in 2 years. And because the date printed on that will was a day I remembered down to the hour. A day I'd spent in a hard chair next to a hospital bed, while he floated somewhere the sedation had taken him. I didn't sign. I asked to take a copy home. That's the whole reason you're hearing any of this, because I almost didn't. I need to tell you about my dad before I tell you what my sister did, because you can't feel the rest of it unless you knew his hands. His name was Dennis. He was 68 when he died, and for 41 years, he ran a lathe at a tool and die shop outside Pittsburgh, in the kind of western Pennsylvania town where the mill set everybody's clock and every third father worked with his hands. He had a workshop built off the back of the garage, and he could bring anything with a motor in it back to life. He used to say, "A measurement doesn't lie. Cut it wrong, and the part tells on you every time." I grew up on that bench. I'm a machinist too. I notice when something's a thousandth off. My mom passed 3 years before he did, and it knocked the wind out of him for a while. But he found his feet the way men like him do, in routine and in that shop. He kept her chair at the table, and he kept the walk swept, and he kept his hands busy. What he didn't really tell any of us was that those hands had started to go. A tremor, the doctor called it. Essential tremor. Nothing that would kill him, just something that turned a full coffee cup into an adventure, and turned his signature into a cramped, shaky little scrawl he was embarrassed by. Near the end, he'd brace his right wrist with his left hand, just to sign a birthday card. Hold on to that detail. It matters more than any other. When I was a boy, my dad signed everything I ever brought him at that same kitchen table. Permission slips, report cards, the forms for Little League, the loan papers when I bought my first truck off him for $1, so it would be legal. He'd read every line first, always, and then he'd sign, slow and square, and slide it back. He told me once that your signature is the one thing nobody else gets to use. That when you put your name on a thing, you're making a promise. And a man who signs what he hasn't read, or doesn't mean, is a man who will break both. I didn't think much of it then. It was just Dad talking over a pen. I think about it every single day now. There were 3 of us kids. Michelle's the oldest, 52, and she'd spent years at a title company in town. One of those places that runs on notaries and deeds and closing paperwork, which is a detail I want you to file away and keep. In the middle, there's Nicole, 45, an intensive care nurse who'd been pulling night shifts at the county hospital for 20 years. And me, Sean, the baby, at 38, the one who took after Dad, the one with the shop key on his ring and the grease worn into his knuckles. We were not a close family, exactly, but we weren't at war either. Not until there was suddenly something worth dividing. Michelle had always been the one who handled things. She organized the holidays and the arrangements and the paperwork. And somewhere along the way, she decided that made her owed. When Mom got sick, Michelle ran the calendar, and she never let you forget it. When Dad started to slow down, it was Michelle who drove in with folders and lists and a tone that said the rest of us were freeloaders on her competence. I used to think it was just her way of showing love. Looking back, I think a part of her had been keeping a tab for years, adding up every errand as a debt the family would settle someday. She wasn't a monster. She was just a person who'd quietly convinced herself she deserved more than her share, and then got the chance to take it. Here's a thing my dad said to me maybe 2 years before he died, with a carburetor between us on the bench. He said, "I took care of all the paperwork, so you kids won't have to fight when I'm gone. Went to a lawyer in town, did it right." He said it the way he'd tell you he'd change the oil. Matter of fact, a job done properly and put away where it belonged. I didn't ask a single question. You don't picture the day you'll need to. I just said, "Good, Dad," and handed him the wrench. I had no idea that one offhand sentence in a cold garage would be the thing that saved my whole family's name. Then came the winter he got sick. He'd been having chest pains he hid from all of us, and one morning he called Nicole instead of 911 because he didn't want to be a bother. Nicole, bless her, drove straight over and took him to the emergency room herself. They admitted him. A few days later, they brought him down for a heart catheterization, an angiogram, to get a look at the arteries. It's a common procedure. They go in through the wrist now, most of the time, and they give you what they call conscious sedation, enough to put you in a warm fog and take the edge off. Dad's went in through his right wrist, his signing hand. They wrapped it tight afterward and told him to hold it still. I was there that afternoon. I want you to picture it, because my sister would later swear this was the day our father sat up and executed a 5-page will. He was flat on his back, an IV in the top of his hand, his right wrist bandaged and braced so he couldn't bend it, monitors ticking beside him. And he was so far under the sedation that when I said his name, he smiled at a spot on the ceiling and asked me if we'd gotten the hay in before the rain. We never had hay. We'd never once had hay. He thought it was some year in the 1970s. That was my father at 2 p.m. on the exact day a document swears he calmly signed his estate away at 2:40. He didn't come home. About 10 days later, his heart threw a clot, and he was gone. Quiet, in that same wing, with the 3 of us out in the hall. We buried him on a gray Saturday. Curtis, his oldest friend from the shop, a big, slow man who'd known him since they were 19, stood at the graveside and couldn't push a single word out, just kept turning his cap around in his hands. I remember thinking that was the truest thing anybody said all day. And I remember thinking the worst was finally behind us. It wasn't. It hadn't even shown up yet. 2 weeks after the funeral, Michelle called a family meeting at Dad's house. She had a folder. She'd always been the organized one, and grief makes you grateful for anybody willing to hold the wheel. So at first, I was glad she was steering. Then she opened the folder and laid out a will that none of us had ever heard of in our lives, dated that same winter, and started reading what it gave her. It left her the house. It left her dad's savings. It named her executor, in charge of, and I'm quoting the words she kept repeating, handling everything. To me and Nicole, it left what she called a fair share of the personal items, which is a gentle way of saying his tools and his old truck, and whatever nobody would bother to fight over. And she wanted it done fast. She'd already taken the will down to the courthouse to get herself appointed, and now she had papers for me and Nicole to sign. Waivers, she said, just telling the court we didn't object, so nothing would get held up in delays and legal bills. She had a pen out on the table. She said it was what Dad wanted, that he'd told her so himself, that dragging attorneys into a grieving family would only burn up the estate and set us against each other. Nicole, wrung out from a run of night shifts, actually had the pen in her hand, and I heard my own voice say, before I'd even decided to speak, Let me take a copy home first." The temperature in that kitchen dropped 10 degrees. Michelle wanted to know why. What did I need to check? What could there possibly be to look at? Why was I making this harder on everybody, with our father barely in the ground? And I didn't have a clean answer yet, only that cold feeling from the signature, and no words to hang on it. But that night I sat alone at my own kitchen table, with the copy under a lamp, and I did the one thing my dad taught me. I stopped reacting, and I started measuring, one line at a time. And the list I made got worse the further down the page I went. First line, the signature was wrong. I had watched my father brace that wrist to sign a card 3 weeks before the date on this will. The name on this page was loose and smooth and sure of itself, the way he used to sign back when I was in high school and his hands were young. Second line, the date. I hadn't just heard he was in the hospital that day. I was in the room. His signing wrist was wrapped and strapped and useless, and his mind was somewhere back in 1975, asking about hay. Third line, not one of us had ever heard of this will, and Dad was not a secretive man about that sort of thing. And 2 years back, he'd told me flat out he'd done it properly, with a lawyer. There was no lawyer's name anywhere on this thing. And then the fourth line, the one that turned the feeling into a fact and made my hands go cold over the paper. When Mom died, Dad had put all 3 of our names on his life insurance, split even, 1/3 each. And he'd shown me the letter with a kind of pride. He split everything he ever touched 3 ways, on purpose, because that was the entire point of doing it right. And now I was holding a document that claimed this same careful man had turned around and handed one child the house, the savings, and the keys to all of it, and cut his other 2 down to a truck and a toolbox. It didn't add up. And if there was one thing on this earth my father could not stand, it was a thing that didn't add up. I would love to tell you I felt brave. I didn't. I felt sick. Because contesting a will means standing up in a public courtroom and calling your own sister a liar. It means money I did not have. And it means being the man who tore his family apart over a house while everyone was still crying. Michelle made certain I felt every ounce of that. She called Nicole, she called our aunts. By the end of that week, the story making the rounds was that Sean was greedy. That Sean couldn't accept his own father's wishes. That Sean was too broken up to think straight and was dragging the whole family through hell over a box of wrenches. Then she tried a softer angle, and I'll be honest, it nearly worked. She called me, warm this time, and said she didn't want to fight, that she loved me, that Dad would hate to see this. She offered a compromise. She'd move a little more of the personal property my way, maybe some cash out of the savings, if I just signed the waiver and let her handle the rest, and put the ugliness behind us. For one long night, it sounded like mercy. It sounded like a way out where nobody had to be the villain. I sat in the dark, and I very nearly picked up the pen. Nicole was leaning toward taking it too, just to make the noise stop. What stopped me was small and stupid, and it's the thing I keep coming back to. I pulled the copy out one more time, and I looked at that smooth signature. And I remembered him bracing his wrist to sign Charlie's birthday card, my own son, 3 weeks before he supposedly signed this. And I thought, if this will is real, why is she in such a hurry to pay me to stop looking at it? You don't buy silence about something honest. So I called Nicole and I said, "I'm not signing, and I need you not to either, just for a little while." She went quiet. Then she asked me, gently, if I was sure I wasn't just looking for a reason. If maybe I needed this to be a fight, because a fight was easier than missing him. That one went straight through me. I sat with it for a night, because she wasn't wrong to ask. And then I decided that if I was wrong, I wanted to be proven wrong by facts, not talked out of a bad feeling. So I did the only thing I really know how to do when I'm not certain. I gathered a shoebox of my father's real signatures, decades of them, cashed checks and birthday cards, and the back of my high school diploma where he'd signed as a witness. And I made an appointment with a probate attorney 2 towns over. His name was Mr. Barrett. Quiet, gray, careful. A man who reads every line twice before he lets himself say one word. I spread it all across his desk, and I braced for him to tell me I was a grieving son chasing ghosts. He didn't. He looked at the smooth signature on the will, and then at the shaky ones on the checks from that very same year, for a long, long time. Then he asked me a single question. He asked where my father physically was on the date printed on that document. And when I told him, a hospital bed, sedated, right wrist wrapped for a heart cath, an hour out of the lab, Mr. Barrett set his glasses down on the desk and said the sentence that turned everything around. He said, "Then your father did not sign this, and the law has ways of proving that. We are not going to go into court and beg for your share. We are going to walk in and show the court a forgery." He explained what I was walking into, because he wasn't going to let me pretend it was easy. He said a will contest is slow and public and expensive, that Michelle would fight, that it might cost me a retainer of $4,000 just to open the door, and more after that, with no guarantee. He said most people in my chair sign the waiver and swallow it, because grief, plus a lawyer's bill, plus a hostile sister, is more than most families can bear. He watched me while he said it, measuring me the way I measure a part. I thought about my father's face, bracing that wrist over a birthday card. I wrote the check. It was money I couldn't spare, and the surest $4,000 I ever spent. Here's what most people don't know, and exactly what my sister was counting on us not knowing. You do not simply inherit an estate because you showed up first with a piece of paper. That will has to be proven. And anyone with standing, meaning me, his son, and his heir, can step in and contest it and drag the whole thing into what they call formal probate, where a judge watches every move and nobody gets to rush anybody through. So that is precisely what we did. We filed. And the instant we filed, my sister lost the one thing her whole plan depended on, which was speed. Then Mr. Barrett went to work, calm and in order, like a man torquing bolts to spec. First, he had the court freeze the estate, which stopped Michelle dead in the middle of doing the exact thing I'd feared. She'd had herself added to Dad's checking account while he was sick, to help with his bills. And after he died, she'd quietly moved about $22,000 of it into her own account. For expenses, she said. She'd already listed the house with a realtor and taken a deposit from a buyer. All of it slammed to a stop the day the freeze came down. Second, he sent out subpoenas. And third, he told me to go find out whether my father had ever really used a lawyer, the way he'd claimed. That part turned out to be almost easy once I stopped panicking and started thinking the way my dad thought. He filed things. He kept a fireproof box bolted to the floor of the shop, and the key was on the same ring as the shop door, right in my pocket. Inside, tucked under the truck title and the warranty card for his welder, was a plain envelope from an elder law attorney in town, dated a little over 2 years back. His real will. Signed properly, back when his hand was steadier and his mind was entirely his own. Witnessed and notarized the right way, in a lawyer's office, on an ordinary day when nobody had put a drop of sedation into him. And it said exactly what my father was. It split everything 3 ways, even. The house to be sold, and the money divided equally between Michelle, Nicole, and me. It gave me first option to buy the shop and the tools at a fair price because he knew I'd keep them running. And it named me executor, the steady one he'd written. And I had to set the envelope down on the workbench and breathe over it for a minute before I could keep reading. 2 years before he died, clear-eyed, in a real office, my father had already answered the question my sister forged a whole document to change. He had already taken care of us, exactly the way he'd said he had. Then the subpoenaed records came back. And I want you to slow down with me right here, because this is the precise minute the ground shifted under everybody. Mr. Barrett called me into his office and spread the hospital's own paperwork across the table. Nicole came with me. She was still caught in the middle, still half hoping I was wrong so the family could just be sad together instead of at war. And I understood that. And then Nicole, who reads these charts for a living, went dead quiet as she ran one finger down the medication record from that afternoon. She looked up, and her whole face had changed. She said, "Sean, they gave him Versed and fentanyl at 10 to 2. She said, "The nursing note at 2:30 says drowsy, not oriented to time or place." She said, "His procedure was through his right wrist. They'd have had it splinted and told him not to move it. And nobody on this earth hands a man an hour out of conscious sedation, a 5-page legal document, and watches him sign it in front of witnesses." Then she said the thing I'll carry the rest of my life, low, like it cost her something to let go of. She said, "I was so ready to believe you were just angry. But this isn't anger, is it? Dad couldn't have signed this." That was the afternoon my sister Nicole climbed all the way over to my side of the table. Quick thing before I take you into how the rest of it came apart. If a story about a family and a father's name and a stack of paperwork is landing for you, do me one small favor and subscribe. Because this is the exact kind of story this channel exists to tell. And I promise you, the update at the end is the best part. Alright, back to the record. With Nicole beside me and the medical chart on the table, the impossibility was already ugly for Michelle. But Mr. Barrett wanted it airtight, so he brought in a forensic document examiner, a dry, exact man named Mr. Hollis, who'd spent 30 years telling courts which signatures were real and which were not. I handed him the shoebox. He laid out 2 decades of my father's name in a long row, the confident loops of the old days sliding, year by year, into the small broken scrawl of a man bracing his wrist. And then he set the will's signature down in the middle of them, and even I could see it plain. That signature belonged to the wrong decade. Mr. Hollis explained it better than I ever could. He said a genuine signature evolves, and my father's had, steadily, as the trimmer tightened its grip, until by that winter his real signature was cramped and slow and full of little tremors. The name on the will was none of those things. It was smooth and fluent and quick, and it lined up with samples from years earlier, which is exactly what you get, he said, when somebody copies an old example instead of watching the actual man. He pointed out the blunt little starts and stops where the pen had lifted and touched down again. The fingerprint, he said, of a hand drawing a picture of a signature, rather than writing one from muscle memory. His written opinion was about as strong as those opinions ever get. That name was not put on the page by my father. And then there was the notary. And this is where my sister's own cleverness turned around and bit her. That will had a self-proving affidavit stapled to the back. The little sworn page that says 2 witnesses watched the man sign, all stamped and notarized and official. And that stamp was supposed to be the thing that made the whole document bulletproof. Except a notary is required to keep a journal of what they notarize. Mr. Barrett subpoenaed it. The notary was a woman named Pam, who happened to work at the very same title company as Michelle. And Pam's journal had no entry for my father. None. Not that day, not any day, not ever. In a deposition, under oath, with her own commission on the line, Pam came apart in about 20 minutes. She admitted Michelle had brought her the document already filled out and signed, that she had never once met my father, never watched him put pen to anything, that she'd stamped it as a favor because Michelle told her Dad had signed it up at the hospital and just needed it made official. That is not a favor. That is notary fraud, and it is a crime. And Pam sat there going grayer and grayer as Mr. Barrett explained that to her in the quietest voice you ever heard. The 2 witnesses were next. One was Michelle's husband, Rick. The other was a friend of hers, and neither of them could keep the story straight for 5 minutes. Rick swore up and down that they'd all stood together in the hospital room. The friend, in a separate deposition down the hall, said they'd actually signed later at Michelle's kitchen table because it was simpler. Rick couldn't tell anyone what my father was wearing, or that there was an IV in his hand, or that his wrist was wrapped, because Rick had never set foot in that room. The whole thing let go the way a bad weld lets go the second you put a load on it, all at once, along a seam that was never really joined. My sister had built her case out of people who loved her or owed her, and underweight, not one of them held. The night after those depositions, I drove out to the shop and just sat in it for a while, the way Dad used to. It still smelled like cutting oil and cold metal and the coffee he burned every morning. Charlie, my boy, had left a toy wrench on the bench. Curtis had dropped off a stack of old cards and letters my father had signed over the years to help the examiner, and had stuck a note on top in his shaky hand that just said, "Denny always did things right. Get her." I sat there under the one bare bulb, and I understood that I wasn't tearing my family apart. My family had already been torn. I was just refusing to bury the evidence with the man. The strangest thing, through all of it, was Michelle herself. Right up to the day of the hearing, she carried on like she'd already won. She told the aunts I was going to lose everything I had on lawyer bills. She told Nicole I'd dragged the family through the mud for nothing. She had cashed a deposit on a house that was never hers to sell, and spent money that was never hers to spend. And she genuinely seemed to believe that acting certain was the same thing as being right. She had no idea that every subpoena had already come home, that the medical chart and the empty journal and Mr. Hollis's report were all sitting in one thick folder with her name on the wrong side of it. The hearing itself was not a movie. There was no gasp, no swell of music. It was a Tuesday in a plain room in front of a judge who read paper for a living. Mr. Barrett laid it out in order, the way you'd assemble a machine so that anyone watching could see each part do its job. Here is the will. Here is the date printed on it. Here is the hospital's own record, showing the man was sedated and splinted and not oriented to time or place at the hour he supposedly signed. Here is the examiner who says the signature is not his. Here is the notary who admits under oath she never saw him sign. And here, Your Honor, is his real will, executed 2 years earlier in a lawyer's office, splitting the estate evenly, exactly the way this life insurance policy already did. The judge did not need long. He denied the forged will probate, which is the legal way of saying it was worth less than the paper it was printed on. He removed Michelle as executor and put my father's real will into force, which meant the estate would be split 3 ways, even, the way Dad wrote it and the way Dad was. He ordered Michelle to return the $22,000 she'd taken and to unwind the sale she'd started on the house. And then, in the flattest voice you can imagine, he said the court would be referring the matter to the district attorney's office, because forging a will and filing it with a court is not a family disagreement. It is a felony. Here's what happened next, because I know that's the part you've really been waiting for. And honestly, it's the part that still gets to me. It took about 1.5 years for all of it to close out. The district attorney did pick it up. My sister was charged with forgery and with tampering with records. And rather than take a felony trial with a hospital chart, a document examiner, and her own notary all lined up against her, she pleaded. She took probation and a felony on her record, and she was ordered to pay back every dollar and every cost she had run up. She lost her job at the title company. Pam lost her notary commission and caught charges of her own. The estate settled the way my father actually wanted it, split straight down the middle, 3 ways. I took him up on the offer he'd left me in that real will and bought the shop and his tools at a fair price. So his lathe still runs and his workbench still wears the same dents. We sold the house because none of us could stand to live in it, and we divided the money even, and I made sure Nicole got hers down to the penny. And I mailed Michelle her third too, every dollar of it, because it was hers under Dad's real will, and I was not going to turn into her just to punish her. That was the one line I decided I would not cross. He split everything 3 ways. So did I. My boy Charlie is 7 now, and on Saturdays he stands on an upturned milk crate at my father's bench and hands me the wrong wrench with total confidence, exactly the way I used to hand it to Dad. Curtis still comes around, slower every year, and tells Charlie stories about his grandfather that may or may not be strictly true. And Dad's truck, that stubborn 1994 Ford that Michelle waved off as a personal item nobody would fight over, sits in the shop where it belongs. I turned the key on it last Sunday, and it caught on the first try, the way it always did for him, like it knew whose hands were back on the wheel. I don't have an older sister anymore, not the way I once did. We don't speak. I've made my peace with that, mostly, on the nights it lets me. But I'll tell you what I got instead, and it was worth more than any third of a house. My father spent 41 years believing that a measurement doesn't lie, and a man's name is a promise. That if you do a thing right and put your signature on it, that signature stands for you. My sister tried to forge over that promise while he was too sedated to defend it. And the very habits he'd built his whole quiet life on, the paperwork done right, the box bolted to the floor, even the checks he signed with a trembling hand, those are the exact things that reached up and told the truth for him. He'd taken care of us. He said he had. He wasn't lying. So let me leave you with a thing I still turn over on the hard nights. If it had been you, and slowing the whole thing down meant standing up in public and accusing your own sister of a crime with your father barely in the ground, would you have pushed the way I did? Or would you have signed the waiver and saved whatever was left of the family? Be honest with me down in the comments, because some days I still don't know whether I did the kind thing or only the right one. And I'm always curious who I'm talking to out there, so tell me what state you're listening from and how old you are. If this one held you, give it a like so it finds the next person who needs it, and I'll see you in the next one.